Hello, CE students that are my B Day L through Z students. Unfortunately, fall break has taken our beautiful peer review day away from us in class, and peer reviews are so incredibly important. They just simply can't be missed. So I'm asking you to conduct a formal peer review at home with a trusted parent or guardian. And hopefully that trusted parent or guardian is sitting next to you right now, and from here on out, I will be speaking to them. So hi, peer reviewer. I'm so incredibly grateful that you're willing to spend time to help your student do the very best they can on this very important assignment. This assignment is 25% of the grade, your student's grade for this semester, so it's a big deal. So it's really lovely that you would spend the time to help give them the feedback they need to improve their work and put forth their best work possible. I really, really appreciate your support and your willingness to engage in this. Alrighty, so peer reviewers, here we go. First of all, again, thank you so much for your help. Dedicated parents and guardians are just a student's very best asset. There's no other way around it. I can't do my job if I don't have your support. So it's really helpful, and thank you so much. Alrighty, so peer reviewers, first thing, in front of you, you should have a printed copy of your student's full literature review. It should be about 8 pages, 6 pages of writing and 2 pages of a works cited page at the very end. So at the top of that first page, if you would just write your name there, and we'll also write the rubric scores at the end of this peer review. We'll also write those at the top of that front page as well. If you don't have a copy of the literature review in front of you, a printed paper copy, please pause the video and print one out for me, because you'll be making corrections and giving feedback directly on the paper. I find that that's still the very best way to give feedback to students. Yeah, it's old school, but I find that it's the most effective. Okay, so first of all, this literature review should be 6 pages of typed content at least. It can be more than that, but it shouldn't be more than 8 pages of typed content. So the works cited at the very end of the paper isn't included in the page length. So the packet in front of you should be at least 8 pages long. So the length requirement is important. Weber State is very serious about this length requirement. So please ensure that this literature review follows that page count. And then this whole literature review should answer the question for you. It should give you an idea of the conversation surrounding the idea of whether our current American school funding system is fair for all students. So this literature review should not answer that question from the student's point of view. So a literature review is just where the student is asked to take sources of different opinions on a given topic and compare and contrast those sources in an academic way. So the student's opinion should not be evident in the literature review. We'll teach them later how to put their opinion in there. But for now, the literature review is just a fancy way of saying, I've looked at 6 sources and here is what they say in concert with each other, in comparison and contrast with each other. So this literature review should give a comprehensive overview of the full conversation surrounding the question, is the current American school funding system fair to all students? So at the end of the day, hopefully that the literature review in front of you is answering that question, giving an overview of that conversation. This paper should be written in a formal college level academic writing style. So it should be written in third person, no personal statements, with an elevated word choice. And it should be carefully formatted in MLA formatting. And it should be free. Weber State requires that the papers are free of any errors in grammar, punctuation, spelling, style, and formatting. And they're pretty serious about that. So that's what you're here to help us with today. So first of all, this literature review should follow this basic outline. It should have one big long overall introduction that introduces the whole thing. And that introduction should have these 4 components. It should give an introduction of the topic origins, the context and the history and the importance of it. It should give a clear thesis statement. It shouldn't take a side or show any bias, but a thesis statement kind of describing the debate surrounding the issue. Then it should give a brief preview of the various sides of the conversation. It should tell me the different sources, briefly give an idea of what those different sources, those 6 sources, are going to say. And the overall introduction should assume that the reader doesn't know anything about this topic. So the student should be giving you a little bit of background, enough background on the information for this specific topic that you can have a working understanding of it before you go into the details. Okay, so the student should be using college level transition words throughout, words and phrases throughout this literature review, helping the reader move through the information smoothly and making the information and the connections within each of the sources very clear. So this literature review should be divided into 2 headings. The first heading should only involve a discussion about money, funding, and resources for schools. The second heading should only involve things other than money and resources, like socioeconomic situations, a student's race, and family and community components. So each of the 6 sources that the student was asked to read and include in this literature review, each of those 6 sources should be discussed in each heading. So each source should be discussed at least twice, at least once in each heading, hopefully more though. So in the first heading, they should give you a mini introduction about the idea of money, funding, resources. Then they should tell me the who, what, and why of every single source, all 6 sources. That means who wrote it, the ideas behind it, the why, and the what, which is they need to fully introduce the full title of the source, which is really hard for students sometimes. And they need to do all of that introduction in correct MLA format. And you can ask your student what that should look like. So then the bulk of this heading should be a clear compare and contrast with the connections between each of the 6 sources. So essentially the student should have found an academic and organized way to discuss all 6 sources as they compare, as their ideas within that compare and contrast with one another. Then that heading should have a wrap up. It should give an overview of the connections that they found within the heading and directly relate those findings back to their overall thesis, this one right here. And so they should follow the same pattern with heading number 2, except for in heading number 2, they've already formally introduced their sources in heading number 1. So they don't need to go through the whole thing of giving the full source name, title, and the full author's name. They can continue to refer to the source by the author's last name. So they should do the same thing, introduce this heading. They should give the who, what, and why of each source, although they don't need to formally reintroduce each source. And then they should give clear and detailed connections and contrasts between each source only regarding issues of socioeconomic situations, race, and family components without adding in that money and resources, since it was already covered in heading number 1. Then we're asking students to wrap up that second heading, giving an overview of those connections, directly relating it back to the overall thesis. And then we're moving into the overall conclusion, which has several different parts. And this is the most important part of the paper. Basically, the rest of the paper, everything that came before it was just basically laying the foundation for what the student is going to do in the overall conclusion. The overall conclusion is the part where the student gets to share their higher level thinking and their ability to kind of project the effects of this issue onto our society. So this is the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. All of the rest is just sides and appetizers. So the conclusion should first of all restate the overall thesis, remind the reader what our whole point is here, summarize the supporting points, summarize what was discussed in the 2 headings, and describe the features of this overall conversation. And again, the conversation is surrounding the question, is our current American school funding system fair for all students? Then, this is really hard for students and they often forget this area. They're going to discuss the areas for further inquiry. So they're just basically going to say, what still needs to be explored by scholars in this particular conversation? What could use some more development, some more research? What could use future critical academic attention? Recognize where the sources have not covered everything about the topic. Are there ideas that haven't been explored in this conversation? The students should still not enter into this debate. They should still be objective when discussing these areas of further inquiry. And then they should tell me who cares, who should care about this overall topic, specifically who should care. So not just, you know, people in low income communities, but who should care? Is it policymakers? Is it parents? If so, what kind of parents? Is it students? If so, what kind of students? If so, if it's teachers, what kind of teachers? And truly, all citizens of our society should care about this topic. And the student should convince me why. Every student, every citizen of the American society should care about this topic. The student should tell me, why does it matter? Why is it urgent? Why do we have to fix this right now? Why do we have to address it? And then once all of that is done, we got to have the student, and this is the second hardest thing for students to do, and they often forget this. So I'm hoping that you can help them ensure that they have what's called a big picture. So the big picture is asking the student to, now we've talked about the world of education. How can we move outside the world of education and see how our society's education system affects the rest of our society as a whole? So basically I'm asking students to say, what's going to happen to our society if we don't fix these education funding problems? What kind of society are we going to have if only certain members of our society are well educated? In the long run, what are the effects on our society if low income and socioeconomically disadvantaged students do not receive an equal education? What kind of society are we going to have? And on the other hand, what kind of society can we have if we somehow find a way to ensure that every single student, regardless of race, family income, where they live, what family they were born into, every single student in America received an equal, equitable, quality education? What kind of society would we have? What kind of parents? What kind of voters? What kind of leaders? What kind of policymakers are we going to have if we can fix our education system? So that's the big picture we're looking for. And hopefully your student has provided you with all that. If they haven't, please make notes on their paper, because again, the feedback that you give them isn't to hurt them, it's to help improve their paper before I get to it, before I'm grading it. So we ask students to edit their papers through 8 different lenses, and I know that that sounds excessive, but here's the thing. A college level paper should be free of errors of many kinds. So first, they should, if you could go through the paper and you can ensure that their paper follows the outline that we just looked over, this outline right here. If you could ensure that the paper follows that outline, that's step number 1. Step number 2, if you could read through the paper, making sure that the information makes sense and it flows in an organized way that's easy to understand. Then next, I know these lens numbers are messed up, but sorry about that. Next, you're going to take a look through the MLA formatting of the paper. And if you really want to spend a lot of time learning about MLA formatting, I have some helpful videos for you here on Canvas. If you're not interested in that, have your student just quickly explain to you what they should have in MLA and what they have done. The most important thing for MLA is to ensure that the student has in-text citations. That means little parenthetical statements within their paper and throughout their paper that shows that they are attributing information to specific authors. Otherwise, it's plagiarism, and otherwise Weber State can be real upset. So please make sure that your student has several, and by several I mean at least 20 in-text citations within their paper that follow MLA guidelines. And you can ask your student a little more about that. That just ensures that they are being careful about their academic honesty and attribution so they don't get in trouble with plagiarism. Next, if you could go through the paper and ensure that it follows the rubric that's given, and we'll talk about that rubric in a second. And then next, if you could take a look through and read through the paper and mark any distracting errors in conventions, which is a fancy way of saying errors in spelling, punctuation, grammar. Also, we're looking for errors in vague pronouns. If they're using it and they could just tell me what it is probably not a good idea. It's probably too vague. And also, we should double check that the syntax of their sentences, which is a fancy way of saying the way that they've constructed their sentences, is clear and doesn't have any errors in it. Next, what I try to teach the students is called clear and concise college level writing, which means that they should say specifically what they mean in as few clear words as possible. So we're not looking to write the great American novel. We're looking to convey information as clearly and concisely as possible. So if they have a lot of wordy sentences that are full of a ton of prepositions, they should revise those sentences to make sure that they're as clear and concise as possible. Next, we're making sure that we're reading through the paper and ensuring that it doesn't have any formality errors. Again, this is an academic paper in a elevated academic situation, so the student should never refer to themselves or to the reader. They should never use words like I, we, us, you, my, or me. They should also use no slang terms or informal word choices, so take a look at that. And Lens 8, having somebody look at your paper through fresh eyes. Well, hopefully you're doing that right now. That's you. So if you can take a look through the paper with all of these different ideas in mind, it will ensure that they have the feedback they need to get the highest grade possible on this important assignment. The rubric that I'm using to grade this assignment has already been given to students. They should have a hard copy of it in their binder. If they don't, I have a PDF copy of it and a photo uploaded to the Canvas assignment for this assignment. So if you'll refer to this rubric when you're grading it, all you need to do is take a look in each row and find which of these descriptions best describes what your student has in their current literature review. And I know it seems kind of mean, but really it won't do them any favors for you to be overly generous with your grading here, because the more feedback you can give, the better they can do on their final literature review. So don't hesitate to be accurate with your grading so they know where they need to go back and revise and improve. So if you take a look at each row here and decide which area, we have mastery, which is a 4, proficiency, which is a 3, approaching proficiency, which is a 2, and a minimal proficiency, which is a 1. These little point values are assigned it's a 100-point assignment. And so don't pay attention to these point values. Just think of it as a 4 is the highest, a 3, 2, and a 1 is the lowest. If you can give them those numbers in each row, that would be great. And then if you assign a number in each row, if you go back to the front page of the literature review where you signed your name, if you'll in order write those scores on the front page. So you should have, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 numbers on the front of that page, and each of those numbers should be 1 through 4. And if you'll just do them in order from top to bottom of how the rubric is laid out, that'll help me know what scores you gave the students, so I can gauge how well they've improved from this version of their literature review to the final version. If you'll write your scores on the front page of the literature review, then the student will take pictures of your work, of your feedback for them, and they'll upload it to the assignment, and then they will have completed this assignment. Again, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you for your willingness to spend time helping your student get the feedback that they need to be as successful as they can. And I just really appreciate it. I hope you and your student have a lovely fall break. And thank you so much. Talk to you later. Okay, bye.